He was just a man with a camera, chasing morning light on a quiet street. But when he turned around, she was there, covered in dust, limping, bleeding, yet silent. No bark, no growl, just eyes that begged for help. Not pity. That's how their story began, not with noise, but with presence. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Westbrook, Vermont, a small town with long shadows. The golden hush of an early October morning hung over the quiet town of Westbrook. Vermont, maple leaves, burnt orange and amber, drifted gently down the cracked sidewalks like a silent confetti. The air smelled of cold stone and old chimneys, crisp with the first real bite of fall. Along Maple Street, rows of old colonial homes stood like sleepy sentinels wrapped in ivy and memory, their wooden shutters peeling from years of snow and sun. Jake Rowan stood at the edge of the curb, adjusting his camera's focus. He was 37, lean but not gaunt, with shaggy brown hair that always looked like he'd just taken off a beanie. His denim jacket bore smudges of dried clay and dust, a testament to the way he threw himself into every shot, lying on his stomach in the dirt if he had to. His fingers moved with the finesse of someone who had been holding cameras longer than he'd held hands. Photography had become more than work for Jake. It was a refuge. He lived alone in a modest rental off Cedar Lane, just outside town. Ever since his marriage ended 3 years ago, the divorce wasn't bitter, but it left him hollowed out. Quieter since then. He'd kept mostly to himself, taking odd photography gigs, helping the local paper with event shots, and walking Maple Street during golden hour to chase light through falling leaves. That morning, he was chasing the light again, crouched low, framing the slant of morning sun as it kissed the corner of an abandoned porch. The lens clicked once, twice, and then he felt it. Not a sound, not a shadow, but a feeling. He straightened slowly, suddenly aware that he was being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck bristled. Turning around, he expected perhaps a neighbor or a jogger on the sidewalk. But it wasn't a person, it was a dog, a German shepherd, larger than any he'd seen in town, stood about 10 feet behind him. Its fur was matted and dusty, the black and tan coat dulled with grit and exhaustion. One front leg was slightly raised, and its posture was strained, limping. Though it didn't whine, its chest heaved with shallow breaths, and there were small dried flecks of blood on its side. But what rooted Jake in place wasn't the animal's condition. It was its eyes, pale amber, rimmed in pain, but lit with something unmistakable. Urgency, desperation, and something he couldn't quite name, trust. The dog didn't growl, didn't bark, it just stood there, panting, silently. Its gaze locked onto Jake's, then slowly. It turned its head toward the bushes on the edge of the sidewalk. Jake blinked. What the? A soft, wet sound, barely audible, came from the shrubs. A whimper. Jake stepped forward cautiously. The German shepherd didn't move, but its ears flattened. Jake crouched near the bush, parting the brittle branches. His breath caught in his throat. Nestled in the dirt and leaves lay a puppy, barely a few weeks old, same coloring, same build. Its fur was soaked with blood from an open wound on its side, and one hind leg was bent at an unnatural angle. The pup trembled with every breath, its tiny whimpers barely rising above the breeze. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. Instinct overrode logic. He pulled off his flannel overshirt and gently wrapped the trembling body in it, careful not to shift the injured leg. The mother let out a soft chuff behind him, not aggressive, not warning, just there. Jake glanced back at her. "You brought me here, didn't you?" he whispered. "You knew." The dog held his gaze for a long moment, then she limped a few paces closer, lowered herself slowly onto the sidewalk, and lay down, watching. Always watching. He cradled the pup in his arms. Its warmth was fading fast. "I can't leave it here," Jake muttered. "And I can't call animal control. Not for this." His gaze darted around. It was early, barely 7:15 a.m., and most of Maple Street was still asleep. The hum of a distant lawnmower buzzed from 2 streets over. A squirrel scampered across the power line above. Jake stood and looked down at the older dog. "I'm taking her with me," he said aloud. Not sure why he spoke. You can follow if you want. The dog's ears perked slightly. She didn't rise. She simply watched as he turned and began walking briskly down the sidewalk. Pup bundled in his arms. Footsteps, soft and uneven, echoed behind him moments later. The garage was cold. Even in the early afternoon sun, Jake Rowan had cleared a space on the workbench with the urgency of someone untrained but unwilling to wait for help. He laid the injured puppy gently onto an old, folded towel, its shallow breaths echoing louder than any siren might have. The pup's blood had soaked through the flannel he'd used earlier, seeping into his jacket and skin. Jake wasn't a vet. He wasn't even particularly good in emergencies. His hands trembled as he dug through a plastic toolbox he hadn't touched in years, pulling out a dusty first aid kit left over from a hiking trip he barely remembered. Everything felt clumsy. The peroxide, the shaking cotton balls, the blunt-edged scissors. But he worked anyway, his jaw clenched, his breath tight, outside, on the patch of pavement just before the threshold of the garage. The adult German shepherd had laid herself down. Her eyes never left the pup. She didn't bark, didn't whimper, only watched. Her body was still, but her ears twitched at every sound from inside, across the street, in a yellow house with weathered green shutters. A second-story curtain shifted slightly. Lily Sanders, 9 years old, sat tucked into the window nook of her bedroom. Her knees hugged to her chest. Her face was pale, framed by a curtain of light blonde hair that she refused to let her mother braid. The soft fleece of her lavender hoodie bunched under her chin. She hadn't said much for the past 2 years, not since the day her father died and the world turned too big, too fast. Her voice had shrunk into her chest, where it stayed most days, safe behind her ribs. She wasn't supposed to be watching. But something about the movement outside, the way Jake had carried the little dog, the way the mother hadn't followed but hadn't left, pulled her toward the glass. She watched as Jake pressed a cloth against the puppy's wound, as he fumbled with gauze and masking tape. Brow furrowed, shoulders hunched, his hands moved with a strange mix of awkwardness and tenderness, as if he didn't quite know what he was doing but knew he had to do it anyway. Lily's breath fogged the window. The mother dog shifted slightly, only to rest her chin on her front paws. Her eyes never closed from the window. Lily could see it all, the way the pup's little body trembled, the way Jake paused every few minutes to breathe. Stare, then try again. Something in his face. Maybe the way his mouth stayed in a tight line. Maybe the way he never looked away from what scared him, made her feel safe. Not for herself. Maybe, but for the little dog. Jake didn't know he was being watched. He didn't know that the girl across the street had drawn her curtains for the first time in weeks. He didn't know that his clumsy effort, his bloody hands, his silence were changing something quietly, invisibly, outside. The wind rustled through the brittle branches of the maple trees lining the sidewalk. Red and gold leaves scraped across the concrete like whispers. The town of Westbrook, usually buzzing with lawnmowers and voices, felt suspended in this moment. Garage door half open, one dog bleeding, one dog guarding, one girl watching. Inside the house across the street. Lily didn't speak, but for the first time in months. Her fingers twitched toward her sketchbook. The morning mist still hung low over Maple Street, softening the shapes of porches and hedges as the sun pushed shyly through the trees. Jake Rowan stepped outside his garage, the chill biting lightly at his neck. His fingers were stiff from the night's work, but his mind felt oddly steady, as if he'd stepped into some quiet current and decided to float with it. Inside the garage, the puppy stirred. It had made it through the night. He knelt beside the makeshift bed, an old dog crate lined with blankets, heated by a portable ceramic heater he'd pulled from the attic. The pup's breathing had steadied, and it blinked slowly when he placed a hand beside its paw. A faint wag of the tail. It was the first time Jake dared to hope behind him. There was the soft creak of a screen door. Amanda Sanders stood just beyond the threshold. She wore a thick cardigan over jeans and slippers, her hair pulled up in a way that said she hadn't looked in the mirror yet. Her face carried the kind of exhaustion worn by people who hadn't had a full night's sleep in years. But this morning, it was tempered by something else. Concern. "I called Dr. Lowell," she said. "He'll come by around 10. Jake nodded, his voice caught behind a grateful smile. "Thanks. Really?" Amanda lingered for a moment, glancing toward the crate. "How's the little guy still here?" Jake said, hanging on. He didn't mention how. At 2 a.m, he'd sat with the puppy on his lap, not knowing if its final breath would come in that moment, or how the mother, now named Echo, had remained outside the door, unmoving, unblinking, a stone guardian under the stars. Amanda hesitated. "Lily, she's been asking to come over." Jake looked up, surprised. "She wants to see the dog." Amanda gave a small smile. "She hasn't said more than 2 words to anyone outside school in months, but she watched you all day yesterday. She's curious." A beat passed. Jake gestured toward the crate. "If she wants to come help, I'd be glad for the extra hands." 10 minutes later, Lily stepped into the garage, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, oversized sleeves pulled over her fingers. She wore the same lavender hoodie and soft gray leggings. Her eyes flicked from the dog crate to Jake, then back again. She didn't speak. "This is Rusty," Jake said, crouching beside the pup. "Named him this morning, figured it fit. Red coat, stubborn eyes." Lily's face didn't change, but she stepped closer. Echo, still lying just outside the garage, raised her head, her eyes locked on Lily. A quiet moment passed. Then she lowered it again, Jake noticed. "She knows who you are," he said. "She's been watching, too." Lily crouched beside the crate, her movements small and slow. Rusty lifted his head weakly. Lily reached a hand inside, pausing, waiting, and then gently touched his paw. Jake expected her to pull back, but instead she whispered, "Hey, just that." Jake blinked, hiding his surprise. The word came like the smallest leaf falling into a still lake. She stayed for an hour, quiet, focused. She watched Jake clean Rusty's bandage, helped refill the water bowl, even hummed softly when the pup whimpered. She didn't look at Jake much, but when she did, there was no fear in her eyes. Jake noticed something else. Echo never moved. She watched everything. Yes, but without tension. It was no longer vigilance driven by instinct. It was patience. Trust. By the time Dr. Lowell arrived, a tall, weathered man in his 60s with a lined face and a permanent squint from years under sunlit barns. Lily had pulled up a lawn chair and was reading a book beside Rusty's crate. Dr. Lowell wore jeans and a faded Carhartt jacket, his stethoscope looped carelessly around his neck. His voice was low and gravelly, and he greeted Jake with a short nod. "Heard you've got a mess of a shepherd pup and a miracle mother." Jake led him in. Dr. Lowell crouched with the kind of practiced gentleness that comes from treating both animals and the people who love them. "Looks like she's got grit," he murmured. Checking Rusty's leg, "The break isn't clean, but she's young. Might limp for a while, but with care, she'll make it." Jake exhaled. The words felt like warm water. Dr. Lowell stood. "Keep her off that leg. No rough play. I'll leave you some antibiotics and wrap. You've done good so far." "Rowan." Jake hesitated, and the mother Lowell glanced at Echo, still unmoving at the garage entrance. "She's watching you. Not me. That's your answer." By the time the vet left, the sun had fully broken through the mist, casting long, golden fingers across the garage floor. Lily helped change Rusty's bandage that afternoon. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. That evening, as the light turned honeyed and the air began to chill, Jake found himself standing on his front porch, arms crossed, looking across the street at the little yellow house, behind the second-floor curtain. He saw Lily's face once more. She raised a hand, not to wave, but to press her palm gently against the glass. Jake lifted his in return, and outside the garage, Echo lay in the same spot, unmoving, eyes fixed on the door, not with suspicion, but with something quieter, something deeper, trust, perhaps, or hope. The wind picked up over Westbrook that morning, brushing crisp leaves across sidewalks and rattling shutters like a gentle warning. The sky was a pewter gray, neither threatening nor inviting, just still. Jake Rowan stood in his driveway, the trunk of his Subaru Outback open, a soft fleece blanket folded neatly inside a metal transport crate. His hands moved slowly, carefully, as if he were packing something sacred. In many ways, Rusty had been eating, drinking, even standing on her uninjured legs, but her fractured limb needed more than homemade splints and hope. After a second home visit, Dr. Lowell insisted on X-rays and surgical support. The nearest equipped clinic was 2 hours north, in Rutland. The appointment was for 10:30. It was now 8:45. Inside the garage, Rusty lay drowsily on a pile of blankets, her tail wagging weakly as Jake entered. The pup's eyes still held a certain quiet light, part pain, part courage. Lily had been over nearly every day since that first visit, and this morning was no different. She sat cross-legged beside Rusty's crate, holding something small in her lap. "I made her something," Lily said, barely above a whisper. Jake leaned in. It was a handkerchief, roughly sewn, with a slightly crooked red heart embroidered in the corner. The edges were frayed, the thread uneven, but it was perfect. "She can keep it with her," Lily added, her eyes fixed on the dog. "So, she knows someone's waiting." Jake felt his throat tighten. She'll love that. Outside, Echo remained in her usual place just outside the garage door. She hadn't left the yard in days. At night, she curled beside the porch steps. During the day, she lay beneath the maple tree where light filtered through orange leaves. She barely ate, but her eyes never dulled. Jake stepped outside with the crate. Echo stood immediately. The German shepherd was lean now, muscles visible beneath her fur. Her rib cage a little too sharp, but her stance was proud, strong. Her tail didn't wag, but it didn't tuck either. as Jake opened the passenger door and secured the crate. He felt a soft nudge at his side. Echo had approached silently, her nose brushing against his hand. She didn't growl, didn't back away. She just looked up at him, then placed her head gently against his wrist. A weightless gesture, a thunderous message. Jake stood frozen, hand resting against her neck. "We'll bring her back," he said softly. Amanda stood by the edge of her porch, watching with one arm crossed, a mug of tea warming the other hand. She hadn't said much that morning. Her face wore the expression of someone watching something she didn't quite believe, but didn't want to break with words. A few neighbors were out too, Dobbins watering his flower boxes, the retired postal worker walking her beagle, even the local mechanic, Travis, leaning on his rusting pickup at the corner. No one spoke, they all just watched. When Jake emerged from the garage carrying Rusty, swaddled in a clean blue blanket, Lily followed, holding a small paper bag of treats and the embroidered handkerchief. Rusty's eyes fluttered open as she was placed in the crate. "She'll be brave," Lily whispered. "She knows we believe in her." Jake gave her a soft nod. "I'll text your mom when we're done. You can come over when we get back." Echo stepped back, still watching, as Jake closed the trunk and rounded to the driver's side. He paused, then bent down so his face was level with hers. "Thank you," he said. Echo blinked. Then, after a moment, she walked to the porch and laid down. Her gaze followed the car even as it rolled past the maple trees, past the cracked sidewalks and curious stairs. When the Subaru turned the corner and disappeared, she remained still. Jake drove without music, glancing occasionally at the rearview mirror. Rusty was quiet but alert. Her breathing was calm. The handkerchief lay folded beside her, her paw resting just on the edge. The road curved northward, winding past stretches of golden trees and fields lined with broken fences. Jake thought about the hundreds of photos he had taken over the years, of bridges in fog, birds mid-flight, children with ice cream cones. But none had captured what he had seen this week. Silent trust, given freely, a girl who found her voice through a dog's heartbeat, a mother who watched from shadows and let her daughter be helped. At a red light, Jake picked up his camera from the passenger seat and snapped a photo through the mirror. Not of Rusty, but of the handkerchief. Just catching a ray of sunlight that fell like a blessing across the crate. It was late September again in Westbrook, the leaves turning with purpose now, gold flickering to crimson, wind carrying the scent of rain and soil. Jake Rowan stepped onto his porch, coffee steaming in his mug, a camera strap slung across his shoulder. The morning light was perfect, soft, low. The kind that caught truth in quiet corners. The past few weeks had unfolded like a slow song. Rusty had returned from the clinic with her leg braced and her ears perked. The vets called her recovery textbook, but Jake called it something else. The little German Shepherd pup had begun to grow into her lanky frame. Her fur had darkened to a rich mahogany across her back, and her eyes sparkled with mischief. She was healing, not just in body, but in spirit. She now spent her mornings waiting at the school gate with Lily, tail wagging as buses rumbled by. Jake had worked with the local principal and Lily's therapist to have Rusty officially designated as a therapy companion. The once silent girl now stood taller in the hallway, shoulders less hunched, voice emerging more and more each week, not loud, but steady. Jake watched them some mornings. Lily, holding Rusty's leash. Rusty, alert but calm, a perfect pair. But Echo was gone. When Jake and Lily had brought Rusty home after the clinic, they had searched every corner of the block, the maple tree, the porch steps, the trail behind the garage. Nothing. Lily had stood in the driveway, her brow furrowed, hands clasped. She wouldn't just leave. She had said Jake had placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle but certain. Maybe she knew Rusty was safe now. Lily didn't argue, but she didn't smile either. A week passed, then another. Jake tried not to look at the porch every morning, but he did. And then, one morning, this morning, he saw her. It was just past sunrise. Jake had wandered down the street, camera in hand, chasing the low light that slipped between fences and tree trunks. He paused near the edge of town where the sidewalk tapered into gravel. And there, through the soft haze of morning mist, she stood. Echo. She was thinner. Her coat dusted with soil and dried leaves, but her stance was strong. Her eyes still that deep. Endless amber. She didn't move closer. She didn't bark. She only looked at him. Jake didn't raise the camera. He didn't speak. He simply stood, breath quiet. After a long moment, Echo blinked. Slowly. Then she turned and walked into the tall grass beyond the trees, her silhouette swallowed by golden light. Jake stood there for a while. He didn't follow. He didn't need to. The next day, he began sorting through his old photo files. There were hundreds, sunsets, frost-covered windows, wild deer, laughing children, but one folder now called to him more than the rest. He titled it, Echo, the Moments That Didn't Need Words, and a month later. The town library held the opening for Jake Rowan's first solo exhibit. The main gallery wall was lined with large canvas prints. Rusty curled beside Lily under a maple tree, Echo lying under a lamplight outside the garage, Jake's hands holding a blood-stained towel. Moments that weren't dramatic but somehow carried the weight of the whole world. The most talked-about photograph, however, was placed in the center, under soft white lighting. It showed Jake from behind, crouched low with his camera, focused on a shot, and behind him, standing on the sidewalk, partially hidden by shadow, Echo. Her head was tilted slightly, her posture relaxed, gaze fixed on him. Jake never even remembered taking it. It had been captured accidentally by his old camera's auto-timer, placed on a tripod the day they first met. People lingered at that photo longer than the rest. Some thought it was staged, others said it felt spiritual. But to Jake, it was simply the beginning, the first proof of trust he hadn't yet earned. A quiet watching he hadn't deserved, and a connection that had forever changed him. Lily, now reading aloud in school, had stood beside Rusty at the opening, greeting guests in a soft voice. Amanda smiled from a nearby corner, eyes never straying too far from her daughter. As the evening wound down, someone asked Jake why he had chosen the title Echo, the moments that didn't need words. He paused, hand resting gently on Rusty's head, because sometimes the loudest voices, he said, are the ones that simply stay. Sometimes the miracles we pray for don't come with thunder or bright lights. Sometimes they arrive on quiet pause, with amber eyes and a silent plea for help. Echo wasn't just a dog, she was a reminder that trust, love, and healing can grow in the most unexpected places, even between a wild heart and a broken one, in our busy lives. We often miss the soft moments where grace appears, a child's first word after silence, a stranger's quiet kindness, the loyalty of an animal that has every reason to run but chooses to stay. These are not coincidences, they are whispers from God, reminding us that He is still working in the shadows, still stitching hearts together in the most miraculous ways. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs a little hope today. Comment Amen below if you believe that trust and healing are gifts from above. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because every week we bring you real stories of love, loss, and the quiet miracles that still walk among us. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may you always have eyes to see the small miracles He places right in front of you.